start this. We will get started. I know there's a lot of people out of town, so we just may not have a big group today.
Are they all, is everyone back for the conference?
No, most people who went to the conference are still there because the main large part of the conference goes through Sunday. They do a leadership section, a leadership portion Wednesday night through Friday morning, and then the family so that's just for leaders, people in leadership invited by their congregations, and then Friday night through Sunday morning is they call it the family conference. So it's for anyone who's a member of any congregation.
That's cool.
So
like Johannes and them, they just went for the leadership part and then they came back.
Yeah, Johannes and Sam just went for the leadership part. So okay. Well, Shabbat Shalom. Hi, Laura.
Shabbat Shalom.
We will go ahead and get started. So last week we talked about, with Lauren, we talked about Shavuot, and the week before that, Johannes kind of led us in like an introduction to the book of Numbers. And we talked about several things about how we can kind of approach this book, because after Leviticus, Numbers tends to be one of the books that people struggle with or think is difficult. And it certainly has some difficult passages in it. But Johannes led a really good discussion about how we should look at it and some of the things that we can learn from it about God's character, and that's just the theology, kind of even God's theology, and we talked about his association with time and how he's kind of fathering them. We kind of framed the book of Numbers a little bit in the sense that they've been given all this instruction from Leviticus, and now they're kind of walking it out. So this kind of wilderness season is kind of all right, we have all this instruction, we have the tabernacle constructed, how do we actually live? So there's a lot of, and of course Numbers starts with this census, and so there's this element of, Israel as a nation, as they have an army now, they have, they're kind of setting themselves up as this kind of almost independent nation. So those are some of the dynamics that we have kind of in play. There's a lot of order in Numbers. We learn a lot about how the tabernacle is moved, and the order of the tribes when they move, because of course there's a lot of movement happening in this wilderness season, which we talk about in this week's portion also. So those are some of the things that we talked about with Numbers, and this week's portion, I think, actually does a really good job of kind of demonstrating some of those principles. We have a little bit of kind of a pivot point in this portion, which we'll talk about kind of when we get there. So last week's portion, since we didn't really talk about it, just as kind of like a, I guess, recap a little bit. Kind of some of the high points of this is that we have this interesting explanation of this jealousy ritual, which is when there's an accusation that someone's wife has gone astray and been unfaithful, so there's this whole ritual to figure out whether or not she has been. We have this discussion of a Nazarite vow, and of course we get the Aaronic Benediction. So this is, we just had this speaking of this blessing that becomes really central even in Jewish tradition, and it's really this blessing of God putting his name on his people. And then the end of the portion is this very kind of long and repetitive explanation of the offerings that all the different, I call them princes of the tribes, bring to the tabernacle. So each tribe is basically bringing, and it specifies the people and it specifies what they bring, so bringing all these offerings to the tabernacle. So at this point, that portion kind of ends with Moses in the tabernacle speaking with God. So we pick up in this portion in Numbers 8. So really what I want to do today is kind of work through, and we'll kind of go through these first couple of chapters probably a little bit more quickly, and then we'll kind of spend a little bit more time talking about several things that are going on in Numbers 11. And again, remember that kind of our overall structure of the Torah, that we have kind of Genesis and Exodus as kind of these introductory narrative books, and then we have the giving of the Torah and the giving of the law and Leviticus, and then we have kind of these last two books of the Torah as kind of this narrative of after the Sinai experience going toward the Promised Land. And so Numbers kind of mirrors Exodus in some ways. So there's a couple things that we see some hints of that in this portion, so we'll kind of talk about some of that as well. So in Numbers 8, we have kind of this dedication of the Levites, and it starts with kind of the making of the golden menorah in the tabernacle. So it has this explanation of the menorah, and then there's kind of this setting in and dedication of the Levitical priests. I don't have a whole lot to say about that. However, I do want to point out one thing that I think is an interesting kind of principle is in Numbers 8, 23. So this is kind of after the dedication. It's talking about, we talked about some of the things that the Levites do. It says, Adonai again spoke to Moses, saying, "This is for the Levites, men 25 years old and upward are to present themselves for service to work in the tent of meeting. But at the age of 50, he is to retire from his service and work no longer. He may assist his brothers in the tent of meeting to do their duties, but he himself will no longer do the work. Thus you are to assign the Levites their responsibilities." So what I think is interesting about this is, so the Levites were part of the census earlier in the book of Numbers, but they're not part of the army, right? They're not being sent out to go fight when Israel needs to send the army out. But they're still counted, but they have some kind of parallels here where I think it's interesting that men 25 years and older are actively serving in the tabernacle, which is actually quite a lot of manual labor. There's a lot of hauling wood and there's some heavy lifting involved in tabernacle service, and so it's not that they're just praying and whatever and being in the presence of the Lord. They're doing a lot of heavy work, and so I think it's interesting that God makes this allowance, or this gives this guideline that after a certain age, like, you have put in your time, you don't have to do all this heavy lifting anymore, but they're still there. This commentary that I've been reading talks about, like, they're there and they're almost, which I think is an interesting way that he put it, and I don't quite know what I think about it. If you guys have any comments, you're welcome to share, but he kind of thinks of these older men who are still present but not actively, like I said, doing the heavy lifting, as kind of the guard. Like, they're still there and they're still part of the service, they're just not doing the work, so they kind of call them the guard. And I'm like, I'm not sure if, I don't know, I guess it's not guard in the sense of, security guard or something, but I just thought that was an interesting way to frame that. So they're still assisting and doing work, but it's kind of this principle of, you may have heard some people say, like, retirement is not a biblical principle. So in light of this, I think in some ways we see that. Like, so yes, you may retire from your day job, you may not work a 9-to-5 job anymore, but that doesn't mean that you retire from serving the Lord. And I know we've seen some examples of that in our congregation. We have some older members who are still, very actively serving the Lord. And Dan Jester is probably one of the best examples of this. I was listening to him speak as part of the Tikkun conference last night. He and his son Ben, who's kind of now one of the main leaders of the Tikkun American Network, but they were both speaking last night, and Dan Dan is in his 70s, and he's like, he has no concept that he will ever stop doing what he's doing. You know, he still travels back and forth between the U.S. and Israel, and goes and mentors in all these congregations. Like, he has no plans. I've heard him say before, he didn't say it last night, but I've heard him say before in other contexts, like, he has no plan to stop traveling and stop mentoring and stop writing and researching and, you know, what all these different things. And so I think that's a really great example of this. Is like, he's not doing as much of the day-to-day, administrative working for the network, but he's still very much serving and imparting, and I know what a blessing I think that is, and so I think it's kind of in light of that. Whereas then Ben, in contrast, his son is very much in the grind and the day-to-day of doing administration and helping keep the network running and all that stuff. And so I think it's kind of even cool to see, even just with the generations with them, those different roles playing out. So so there it is in Torah, a biblical definition of retirement.
You only have to work 25 years.
Huh?
You only have to work
25 years. That's funny.
But that just makes sense that, physically, especially, but people don't think of it the way you said, that there's actual physical heavy work.
Yeah.
That it's not expected, that doesn't mean you don't still serve.
Right. Because even just think about, after you served in that, which granted right now we're only in, year 2 out of Egypt, and so they don't have, so really this is even kind of foretelling some of the wisdom that will be imparted to these people, because if you think about it, by the time those who are 25 start serving in the tabernacle, by the time they get to 50, they've been serving serving the Lord for 25 years. So you can think of how much wisdom they would have.
Yes.
So you definitely still want them to be present. You want them around. It's part of that generation to generation concept. So keep moving on into Numbers 9. I really like this section about this second month Passover. So of course, God says that Passover is to be celebrated on the 14th of the first month, which is the month of Nisan. But we have this situation in Numbers 9, verse 6. It says, however, there were some men who could not celebrate Passover because of being defiled by a dead body. So they came to Moses and Aaron on that same day, and these men said to him, "We have become unclean because of the dead man's body. Why should we be kept from presenting the offering of Adonai at the appointed time with the rest of Bnei Israel?" Moses answered them, "Wait, I will inquire what Adonai commands concerning you." Okay, so let's pause there for a second. So, contact with a dead body is one of the kind of categories of ritual impurity, right? So, and as we read on, we'll see that there's a couple other, that this ends up being kind of explained, but we can kind of carry that thought out that of the other categories of ritual impurity we could extend this idea. So the point is that if you're unclean, you can't celebrate Passover because you can't enter the tabernacle, later the temple, and all that stuff. So these are the people, kind of your, I guess, quote unquote common Israelite, who are coming and saying, "Hey, wait a minute, this really probably wasn't even their fault. It's not their, it's probably, it's something unavoidable, very likely, in their life. They didn't, God sets apart these appointed times, and we know, what day they are and all that stuff, but life still happens. People still die, babies are still born, all these different things still happen, right? And so they're like, wait a minute, we still want to celebrate this festival. So why would this be so important to them that they get to celebrate Passover? Why is this so important that they are coming to Moses and Aaron and saying, "Hey, wait a minute, why we still want to do this? How can we do this?"
Well, God says if you don't do it, I guess only if you're not unclean, you'll be cut off. So everyone, it's a commandment, and it's also part of the covenant. The first part of the Passover was the first beginning of the covenant with them.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the things he set in place because he delivered them. That was their deliverance. And
right.
so, I mean, it's everything, but
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know all of the what goes into the offering, or that was the I guess to make you clean, you know, because that whole thing was you have to offer the blood for, you know, so he sees the blood and you're clean, you know. But so I guess maybe they're afraid they won't be clean if they don't offer. I don't know.
Yeah.
All I know is that was the beginning of their deliverance, and he based everything off. I'm the God who delivered you. I'm the God
right.
who hid you from the angel of death. I'm the God who took you out.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to remember this by observing this. And no
mm-hmm.
one's not going to, no one outside, you know, no one gets out of observing this. Everyone
mm-hmm.
observes this or you're cut off.
Yeah.
But I don't know much more than that.
Yeah, no, I think that that's the core of it, right? It's like, this is the remembrance of this deliverance. I like that in this commentary, Robert Alter says, you know, this is one of the main ways, especially at this time, of how they identify with the rest of the community. It's like, the entire nation, you can imagine, you know, the Israelites, everyone is doing it, that if you're not, or you're not able to, then you would kind of feel left out, I think, you know, like, it's just this big national remembrance, and you can't participate. And all that to say is, if you're unclean, you would also have to stay away, I guess, from everyone else, right? Because ritual impurity is, I don't want to call it contagious, but if you don't come in contact with an unclean person, it makes you unclean too. And so they would have to basically be separated away. So, and also I was even thinking about the fact that, you know, when God gives Moses the 10 words, they start with, I am Adonai your God who brought you out of Egypt.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's the first of the 10 words, is God identifying himself with this event. And so it's a big deal. And so basically they're coming before Moses and saying, hey, this isn't our fault. We want to celebrate. We want to observe the feast. We don't have any control over this. What do we do? Because you're right, it was a command. It was like, you must all do this. And so they're like, but this isn't our fault. Like, what do we do? So this is kind of, you know, the example of, you know, the working out of, they've been given all the instructions, but then real life happens. So how do you deal with this? So let's keep reading a little bit.
Can I just ask, compared to other feasts? Okay, because I know this is the first, the most important, but like, aren't they commanded to be at the others as well? And then is there a, you know?
Yeah, they're commanded to serve the important, observe the appointed times. And I'd have to go back, I'm not remembering specifically in all the details of the instruction. In some of them, I don't know that the instruction about observing them is worded quite as strongly as this one. I'd have to go back and read, because I don't remember it.
Because it would totally make sense if it was stronger here, that, you know.
Yeah.
The very need to have a second.
Sure. And I think there's also this principle that sometimes we have these specific events recorded. Man, I'm like getting stuck on my words this morning. As kind of like an example of the principle, right? And so it's like, but at the same time, we don't really see the practice of 2 of everything, except Hanukkah. Do you know what Hanukkah is actually the second of? A second observation of? It's 8 days. What else is 8 days?
Yeah, that's right.
Sukkot.
Yeah.
So it's kind of what I've heard is the story with Hanukkah is that, because Hanukkah, of course, is, you could call it an extra biblical feast. It happens between, you know, in the 400 years of silence that were extremely loud and not silent at all. But it, but it's all about reclaiming the temple, right? And so that means prior to that, they didn't have the temple available to be celebrating the feast, and so it's kind of this second observation of, some people see it as kind of the second celebration of Sukkot. So
people celebrate it like that?
I mean, if you think about it, there's some similarities. I mean, you may not be, I don't know, because Sukkot, I mean, you might not have built the sukkah and all that stuff, but I feel like there are some similarities between the two festivals, and there's lots of different ways that people observe Hanukkah and stuff like that. I mean, it's not Sukkot, but it's this kind of near, because basically they're so happy to have reclaimed the temple that they're kind of having a celebration kind of unto the type of celebration that you would have at Sukkot. So the Lord's response to Moses, back in Numbers 9, picking up verse 9, then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Say to Bnei Israel, saying, if any man, whether you or your descendants, becomes unclean because of a dead body or is away on a long journey, he may yet observe Adonai's Passover. They are to celebrate it at twilight on the 14th day of the second month. With matzot and bitter herbs, they are to eat it. They are not to leave any of it until morning or break any bones. When they celebrate Passover, they are to observe all its regulations. But the person who is clean and not away on a journey, yet neglects to celebrate Passover, that soul shall be cut off from his people, because that person did not present Adonai's offering at the appointed time. That man will bear his sin." So, and then it talks about the outsider, which basically, the outsider has the same regulation as Israel. So basically, God is saying, I feel like, you guys can offer your comments about this kind of interpretation. I feel like God's response to the people's heart of wanting to observe the feast is, yes, I'm going to, like, if you can't, I see your heart, I want because again, it's the whole principle of God wants to dwell with his people. God wants to interact with his people. And so it's the people coming basically to the Lord and saying, we still want to do this. We still want to interact with you in this way. And God's saying, okay, yes, here's how you do that. But he's also very clear that it's not like, oh, it's time to do this. I'm just not feeling up to it. I didn't have time to go make all the preparations. I'm just going to catch the next round and not do it this time. It doesn't work like that. Because what God, I think the principle that is at work here is we have appointed times at appointed times. They know it's coming, right? And so he's making an allowance for an unforeseen circumstance, but he still has the expectation of the people that they would plan and that they would follow his instruction as he originally stated it. I make a point to say that because as we continue through the book of Numbers, we continue to see, and in Deuteronomy and some different areas, we continue to see this play out, is where God makes allowances for different things. And I think sometimes there is a tendency when God gives an inch to take a mile of like, well, if he makes an allowance for this, we can make an allowance for anything we want. And I think this example is a good one of coming back to, it's like, he's being merciful because, again, his desire is to dwell with his people and to let anyone come before him who wants to. But he also gave the instruction in the first place, and so it's held in tension there. So I like this example of that, and I like. And one of the things that Lon brought up last week that I hadn't really thought about too is that, because he was kind of laying out this Passover to Shavuot journey, is that it doesn't say though that if you did celebrate the first Passover because you were clean and you met all the whatever, you did it as God said, that you couldn't join in the second Passover celebration. So part of me is like, did they all do two Passovers? I don't know. We don't really know. I don't know how big a practice this second Passover really was. But I think, the principle remains like God's being kind and letting them still come. So.
How much do you like your bitter herbs?
Right. You just really want to eat some more horseradish.
Horseradish and wasabi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you really want to experience the affliction again, right?
I went through that season of life, right? Yeah, this year I'm just gonna do a double down.
Oh, God, okay. Any other comments, questions about this second Passover kind of situation?
And it's just interesting how fast he falls with the comment, if you do this, you're gonna get like flat out cut off. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm wondering like how many people actually got cut out of the assembly.
Right.
Because we have the same, modern issue of people not getting cut out of the church. I'm not saying this to be like harsh, but a lot of times they put up with things, the tolerance issue in Church of Sin, but I mean, how much is this actually enforced?
Sure.
I don't actually see a record of it in the rest of the.
Right. Yeah, it's
in
interesting
history.
that yeah, like you're saying, like there are a lot of these really strict, I guess, laws or instructions from God that
I don't see an example of
that we
being
don't
carried
see an
out.
example. Like
Yeah.
like there, I don't remember the reference, but the scripture about, if a child speaks against their father, you're like supposed to stone them. It's like we don't actually have records of a lot of children getting stoned. So I mean, it's good. So I mean, so yeah, it's like a little bit hard to know what that. But even like I know several weeks ago, Johannes was teaching on the portion that talks about the Jubilee, and it's like there's actually not even a lot of record about observing the Jubilee.
Yeah.
And so
It's like 2 references maybe.
yeah, and so it's really interesting that we have such instruction, but then we don't see a lot of it playing out. Now, in this circumstance of people being cut off, I guess I'm it's kind of like maybe we're thankful for the mercy, but at the same time, I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because it does seem very harsh, and of course, these are some of the and continue when we get to some of these other things in this portion. These are the examples that people use of this God of wrath.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, but yes, it's the stern principle, but we actually don't, see him doing all of this all the time. Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm wanting to see something I think I've seen, but there's so many feasts, so many things, but there's the 3 times that when they're commanded with the same type of commandment,
Mm-hmm.
where he says, this is appointed for you, it's an appointed time. I don't know if he says that more than those 3, but he also says it's commandment to them.
Mm-hmm.
And to celebrate, and they're all, especially this one, the first one leads up and all of them, but they're all about celebrating him and
Mhm.
what he's done. I'm your God, I delivered you, I called you out, I'm the one who's taking care of you. It's all about celebrating him. So I know there's a lot of other ordinances about discipline or
Mhm.
obedience and all kinds of things that you did or didn't do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to me, these are set apart by remembering what God's doing for you. This is the
Yeah.
God, the only God, and like that sets him apart too, because he's the one
Mhm.
only God.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's that. I think if somebody just didn't want to do it, I mean, that'd be like a pretty big, how do you call it? When you just would frame that person to not really be a part of the group. I mean, you're really not
Yeah.
saying this is my God.
Right.
So if you just don't do it for whatever reason, who are you?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
this was your family, this was your God. You just don't not show up when
Right.
he says, this is who I am, and I've made this day for you to celebrate me for who I am.
Right.
That's who you are, and that's who I am. I'm your God, you're my people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think especially in this context, it would be a really big, blatant offense toward the Lord if you didn't observe by just choice of just like, I don't want to.
Yeah,
because they're all together.
That's not an option.
Everybody's doing it. It's not like, they're not scattered everywhere right now. Everybody's together. So the entire nation of Israel is all doing this. So for one person or one family to just be like, I don't think so. It's like,
Yeah, it wouldn't happen.
There's
Or
gonna
else they
be, I
might as well
think-
go and live with the other nations and do
Yeah.
because they can all do whatever they want.
right. In some sense, you're going to end up being cut off from the people because I think there's going to be some social shaming happening.
A big enough ordeal. He had the whole second section when he talks about the foreigner. By the way, here's all your,
Mhm.
you get to come in too.
Mhm.
It's like,
Yeah. Yeah, it's this whole thing of, I feel like we're seeing God go to these lengths of making sure everyone's included, that then if you choose to not be, then I think that would be a pretty big deal, and it would be pretty noticeable in this context at this point in Israel's history. That's good. Okay, so let's keep moving on a little bit, because I really want us to get to Numbers 11, because there's some good things in there. So we've talked about this before, so I'll just kind of recap this real briefly. We have this next section that talks about the cloud by day and the fire by night being the signal for Israel to move or to camp or all these different things. And it says several times, the TLV says, I guess it uses a couple different, it says at Adonai's word or at the mouth of Adonai or Adonai's order, but basically all of these statements saying that they only move when God says. And so again, this is a difference this is one way that God is demonstrating himself as being different than the gods of the nations around, because there's this visible presence of God among his people, guiding them as they're kind of journeying. And so then we have the making of these silver trumpets, and their purpose is to kind of let everyone know when it's time to move. So similar purpose as the shofar in some instances here. And then we kind of go back into, so then they start actually journeying. So on the 20th day of the second month of the second year, the cloud lifted. And so they set out from Sinai. So we're kind of beginning this journey into the wilderness. They've been kind of at the foot of Mount Sinai up to this point, and so they're starting to move. They kind of recap some of the order about how that's happening, as God has already told them how they're supposed to move. They're kind of implementing that instruction here. Anything else from, that was just kind of like a brief little overview, but is there anything else from Numbers 10 that anybody had questions or something that stood out that you want to talk about before we kind of hang out in Numbers 11 probably for the rest of the time? Okay, so Numbers 11 is kind of this shifting point in the book of Numbers, really, in this portion, but also kind of in the narrative as a whole. So, okay, we'll just kind of take it kind of bit by bit, because there's a lot going on here. So Numbers 11, I'm going to read 1 through 6, and we'll pause for a second. The people were murmuring in the ears of Adonai about hardship, and when Adonai heard, his anger burned. The fire of Adonai blazed among them, ravaging the outskirts of the camp. The people cried out to Moses, so Moses prayed to Adonai, and the fire died out. The name of that place was thus called Taberah, because fire from Adonai had burned among them. The grumblers among them began to have cravings. So Bnei Israel began to wail repeatedly, saying, "If we could just eat some meat. We remember the fish that we used to eat in Egypt for free, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now we have no appetite. We never see anything but this manna." Okay. Does anybody else read this? We had all this food for free and want to go, I'm sorry. You were in slavery.
How many bricks does that equal?
Huh?
How many bricks does that equal?
Right? Yeah. It's like, these are the moments, like, they almost make me laugh, but, like, I know it's a serious thing. And the Lord is usually very quick to remind me of my own complaining about silly things like this. But I seriously read this and it's like, we had all this for free. It's like, but you were in slavery. It's like, is the oppression of your entire people group worth some variety in your diet? Like, seriously? I know it's not funny, but it really just makes me laugh. I think I have to almost laugh to keep from weeping.
Some foodies would say yes.
Huh?
Some foodies would say
yes. No, I get it. I mean, I don't want to eat the same thing every day either, but.
And the TLV too, it has the exclamation mark
Uh-huh.
at the end of like where it's and then garlic. You know, it's
Right. Right.
Like, we had all this stuff, and
We
it was
had
so
all this
good.
great food and it was free.
No, we don't
It's
have
like-
it.
Was it really that great, or you just amplified
They're just
Exactly.
adding.
Because in 9, they were like jumping back and saying, okay, we are moving, implements of 2 days, a month, a year. How long were we traveling?
Right.
Like, was the food really that good, or are you just like having this weird memory?
Right. It's like all of a sudden, when you're finally out of the bad situation, you're like, oh, there were things that weren't so bad. Like, actually, yeah, that was pretty good. Like, it's like all of a sudden you start to like rewrite this narrative. But does this remind anybody else of another passage where the Israelites complain about food?
Which one? We don't like manna, we don't have water, we don't have this, we want that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this is kind of the parallel back to Exodus, right? After they come out of Egypt, they have quite a bit of complaining about food. So let's flip back there. 'Cause remember we talked about, maybe you weren't here yet, but we've talked about how Exodus and Numbers are kind of parallel books in kind of the structure of Torah a little bit. So if we go back to Exodus 16, we have this. So in this portion, back in the portion where this, in Exodus, we actually had this portion. I actually was thinking about this. I went back and was looking at some of my notes because I actually taught this portion too. Is that there's 4 miracles in this portion, basically having to do with kind of meeting their basic needs for water and food and things like that. And so Exodus 16 says, they journeyed on from Elim, and the entire community of Bnei Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month after leaving the land of Egypt. So we're at about the same time. So this was basically a year earlier. That is when this complaint is happening. But the whole congregation of Bnei Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. Bnei Israel said to them, if only we had died by the hand of Adonai in the land of Egypt, where we sat by pots of meat, when we ate bread until we were full. But you have brought us into the wilderness to kill the entire congregation with hunger. And so then Adonai, of course, says, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you. The people will go out and gather a day's portion. And so basically, then we have the onset of this ongoing miracle of daily food that appears every day. Every day. So basically, a year into it, they've had food every day, provided by God. On the 6th day, they get enough for 2 days, so they can have it for the Sabbath. So God has been doing this perpetual miracle for a year, and they're like, we're tired of this. We would like something else. Remember all that great food we had back in Egypt? I want some of that. And so there's a couple interesting things about this. So we kind of talked about back in Exodus that at that point, like they just didn't really have food. So they're crying out for a basic need, right? They're crying out for food and water, which is, a reasonable expectation of, life. So we kind of were like, I think we were able to kind of cut them a little bit of slack. And of course, God is very kind he's demonstrating that he'll meet their needs. This time, they're complaining about the type of food. They are being provided for. They have what they need. I get it. Like I said, I get it. I don't want to eat the exact same thing every single day for a year either. But the point is, very what?
So maybe tacos.
Maybe tacos. Well, there you go.
Maybe not every meal, but.
Right. And so,
I was noticing the difference there is
Mhm.
about their wants rather than their needs. Because everybody needs food,
right.
but they were wanting, so it was more of a flesh thing, something particular,
Yeah.
rather than just meeting the need of nutrition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because somehow, apparently, this manna meets all their nutritional needs.
Right.
Apparently, it's
Right.
the ultimate superfood.
Yeah.
If it's the only thing they really need. And of course, I don't know. Maybe they did have other food mixed in here and there. We don't really know. It doesn't really tell us. But That's kind of the point here is that, which is, kind of,
Well, their complaint is also embellished.
yeah,
They're just complaining just to complain.
yeah, I think, yes, and I think that we even see that God's response is different, right? Whereas, back in Exodus, God was, really in the Exodus and really up until now, like we see this progressive reality of God building his relationship with the people of Israel, and I see it very much as a father-child relationship, where he's building trust with them. Back in Exodus, he's building trust with them. Like, he is this God that's delivered them. He's continuing to meet their needs, so he's building trust with them. Where in that instance they could be seen, as small children, the Israelites, and so he's building trust with them that he's going to provide for their needs, so that they can hopefully trust that he's going to provide for bigger things. Which, coming up here shortly, we're going to see there's a little bit of struggle with that. And so here it's like he is meeting their needs. They're just not very happy with the way that he's doing that, which I think again goes back to kind of a father-child relationship. It's like, I've been at many a dinner with friends and their children where the kids are like, I don't really want to eat that, and so it's like, but this is what I've provided for you. And so God's response here is even, his anger burns against them, and we have this fire, and we don't fully even know what this means, but he's kind of, I guess, zapping them a little bit. I'm like, hey, remember who I am. So I don't know. I shouldn't probably be so silly about it, but it's like he's, I think that it's this tension of, because just a couple chapters previously, remember, we had this Passover experience where they're like, but we really want to observe the feast, and now they're like, we need some better food, please. It's this tension of, which is the human experience in and of itself, right? Which I think Numbers does such a great job of demonstrating. Okay, we can move on.
How big is the time jump between 9 and 11?
Huh?
How big is the time jump between 9 and 11?
It doesn't.
It just throws out this little cryptic comment about the cloud moving, like, whether for 2 days, for a
Right.
month, for a year, and you're like, so how long have we gone on by the time we get to 11?
So we're in the second year. So we're really we're in the second month of the second year. So this thing about the cloud is kind of like this is what happens. This is the principle of what's happening. There are a few things in Numbers that are not quite exactly chronological, so it's a little bit hard to piece that. Because then in 10, when it says that they're moving out on the 20th day of the second month. So I think we can say that we're somewhere in that time frame of when they've started to move out. And so we're kind of in the second month of the second year of.
Can you imagine the same bread though for 2 years?
Right. I mean, I get it. Well, they eat it for 40. They eat it for all 40 in the wilderness.
Yeah.
So I get it. Like I'm saying, I think our flesh understands their complaint. But at the same time, I have a hard time getting past that. We had all this food for free in Egypt. And I'm like, no, you didn't.
We had garlic.
Your life was not your own. You were not free. Anyway.
So
I get wanting garlic.
Here's an interesting parallel verse I keep thinking of in Philippians 3:19 says, or the verse before is saying, and these are the enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly. And so what is it about your belly being your God to where you're led by your carnal, fleshly desires?
And connecting with that, think back to Jacob and Esau.
Right.
The reason that the line is not Abraham, Isaac, and Esau is because Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of soup.
It's a great one. Yeah.
I heard a teaching probably, 10 years ago or something, that unfortunately I can't advocate everything this pastor teaches, but the particular message he was giving was really good. He was talking about the story of Jacob and Esau, and he's like, your appetites will inform your life, was basically his message. It's like, so I think that fits with the verse that you're breaking up from Philippians, and also with this here, like, what you have an appetite for is what will lead you. So it seems that, our desires and our appetites or our bellies have a way of leading us sometimes not in the best direction.
And I'm trying to show him here, don't follow that, follow me.
Right.
You don't need to follow your stomach.
Right.
When the problem got bigger than the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, don't follow that.
So I think the other interesting thing about this section is also Moses' reaction. Because Moses kind of hits a breaking point here. He's really been kind of the faithful one, and he's really, he's like God to the people. He's speaking, he's hearing from Adonai and he's speaking to them, and he's kind of doing the best he can. So, verse 11, so Moses asked Adonai, why have you brought trouble on your servant? Haven't I found favor in your eyes that you laid the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people, or did I give birth to them, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom, just as the nurse carries an infant, to the land you promised to their fathers? Where can I get meat for all these people? For they wail to me, saying, give us meat to eat. I am not able to carry all these people by myself. The load is too heavy for me. If this is how you're treating me, kill me now. If I have found favor in your eyes, kill me, please. Don't let me see my own misery. So he's, like I said, I kind of see Moses here as kind of snapping, of kind of being like, look, I didn't ask to do this.
That's a pretty bold statement.
And now you've made me basically their babysitter, and they're whining and complaining, and I don't want to deal with it.
Take my staff and leave.
Huh?
I'm gonna take my staff and leave.
Right. He's like, it's pretty intense. But I mean, I feel for Moses at the same time. Like, he's bearing this heavy burden.
Had Jethro met up with him yet about getting his elders yet at this point?
So that's the interesting thing. So that happens back in Exodus. So that happens back in the portion right after we have all this water and manna miracle back in Exodus.
So it already happened, but he's still having to overload.
Yeah, it seems that didn't stick, is what it seems to me, is that this, and also, I mean, it's kind of, in some sense, it's that system that was set up was kind of how to deal with quarrels among the people, disagreements between different people. I don't know if that's the exact delineation, but the prescription in that portion is about,
Judging.
Yeah, it's basically judging who's right and wrong in an issue. Whereas it seems that so I don't know, so maybe it's a little bit different, but then we have a similar response, right, from God, where he says, okay, bring me 70 of the elders of Israel, who are leaders. So he's asking, basically, God is sharing the load a little bit. So, so we have this, people like to say that the Spirit is not in the Old Testament. I would like them to explain this verse to me. Then I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take some of the Ruach, the Spirit that is on you, and I will place it on them, and they will carry with you the burden of the people, so you will not be carrying it alone. So, so basically, God is saying at this point he's going to kind of spread the load. He's going to give the same Spirit, the same Ruach that Moses has to these people to help carry this leadership. And yet, so then Adonai is saying, okay, you're going to eat meat tomorrow, so prepare for that. But he says, but you're not going to just get it for 1 day or 2 or 5 or 10, you're going to get it for an entire month. Verse 20, but for an entire month, until it is coming out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you. Wow, okay, this is really extreme. There's a lot of extremes happening in this portion. We had food for free, you're going to eat it so much that it's coming out of your nostrils. Okay, I get it. This is a big deal. But Moses is still questioning, right? Because he's like, hold on. He says, Adonai says, I am going to give meat for an entire month. If Moses' response is, if the flocks and herds were slaughtered, would that would they have enough? Or if all the fish of the sea were caught, would that be enough? And Adonai says, if Adonai's arm too short, now you will see whether my word will come true for you or not. So there's still a little friction happening here. Like I said, I think Moses is having a bit of a breakdown. And he's like, okay, so is this, because I think this is also, the only way that he sees this happens is slaughtering all the flocks and all of, or catching all this fish, which is a big deal also. So he's basically, so I would suggest, it's not in the text, so I'm carrying out a thought a little bit here, is that Moses is, I think, also a little bit concerned. He's like, hold on. You're going to take all of our livelihood. They're shepherds. So he's like, if we're going to have to slaughter all our flocks, we're going to be in a worse place. And so he's like, I think there's probably a little bit of that wrestle going on. But also he's like, it's still not going to be enough for them to eat meat for an entire month. Because they even,
What, after 2 million, 3 million by now?
Probably. I think the estimates of coming out of Egypt are around 2 million.
I mean,
ish.
That's the KC metro area-ish.
Yeah.
Just casually
So
moving to the desert.
Yeah, so to eat meat for 30 days, which was not probably part of their regular diet, even in Egypt. They probably didn't eat meat every day. A lot of cultures don't eat meat every day. And so, he's like, hold up here. This is a lot. Where is this coming from? And so we'll pick up, so then we have this kind of interjection about prophecy. So we'll come back to that in a second. We can finish up this thing about food that I'm so worked up about for some reason, and then we'll come back to this prophecy section. So skipping to verse 31, a wind went out from Adonai and drove quails from the sea. He brought them into the camp to about a day's journey in any direction. So they go out and gather, and they gather this huge amount, which 10 omers, I think somewhere I was reading, I think it's in here, he gives me an estimate, like 5 bushels or something. It's a lot. There's a lot of quail.
A lot of feathers.
Huh?
It's a lot of feathers.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, more than 5 bushels is the estimate in this commentary. So it's a lot. Yet while the meat was between their teeth before it was swallowed, Adonai's anger burned against the people. So he's still not very happy. He started chapter 11 with some burning anger. We still have burning anger. Adonai's anger burned against the people. So Adonai struck the people with a severe plague. For that reason, the name of that place is called Kibroth Hata'ava. I don't know if that's how you say it. I should look it up in Hebrew. It's easier to pronounce sometimes. Because they buried the people who were craving. So, which that means, the translation of that is the graves of greediness. So, names, of course, in Torah carry a lot of meaning. We see a lot of names of places that have to do with events that happen there. So, this place is named for the greed of the people of Israel.
Does it say that in the text?
That's the translation of the name of that place.
Could you repeat that, please?
The graves of greediness.
Okay, I have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's been in my mind about this whole thing, I'm sure everyone sees that too, but I mean, they're coming from slavery,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're complaining about the food they used to get, but it's not just about food, it's about
Right.
being content and
Right.
knowing getting to know this new God who's going to take care of you.
Mm-hmm.
But like we have the same thing in our life, we don't enjoy a new situation, but there's more than just food about it.
Sure.
That we have to get used to and say, this is okay, I'm content, God, you gave this to me, this is the clothes you gave me, I'm content, these are whatever, this is the place I'm working, I'm content, or whatever. But they're learning how to be with one God who's taking care of them. They've never,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they saw his extreme miracles to deliver them out.
Mm-hmm.
And so you think that they'd be able to trust him. It also says in Exodus 16, that passage, it said, at dusk you will eat meat, in the morning you will be filled with bread. But they didn't actually, I guess, get the meat then. I don't know. It does say back there they're going to eat meat. But I
Yeah.
guess they weren't really going to get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I guess it's this whole thing of learning to trust him.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I can understand why Moses is blowing a fuse, because he's got to deal with all the murmuring and all the complaining. Why would one person, why'd you give me these people have to deal with all their murmuring?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't think that, it doesn't look like it's been written to teach him how to deal with mankind when we don't like our circumstances, or that whole thing about murmuring and complaining. Except it's about to get extreme, real fast. So maybe that's how they're gonna get to know that. I don't know.
Well, I think it's kind of the working out of this trust relationship. I think that there is an ongoing process of building trust between God and the people. I think there also is this continued refinement of this God of Israel is different than all other gods, because I do think that there's also, in other some of the other ancient gods, like you're trying to please the gods so that they'll bless you, right? And so you kind of accept whatever God gives you the most benefit.
Yeah, I guess.
And so maybe, I don't know, and this is a little bit of wondering, so that this is I don't know this for sure, but it's like, so maybe it's like we watched all these other people serve all these other gods, and some of them got a lot of really cool stuff, or got the food they wanted, or got all this lavish stuff, whereas at this point, it seems that God is trying to get them to trust that he's going to meet their basic needs and continue to meet their basic needs. Which again is maybe a little bit different. So maybe it's another instance where this looks different than other gods they've seen working, and they're not seeing the benefit of this God in this particular instance. I don't know. I'm kind of throwing out options there. I don't know that that's what's going on here. But I think that it does come back to this contentment principle too that you're bringing up, is that, I think it's interesting, and I think it's an interesting thing for us to keep in mind, that, because again, they're receiving manna every day, so it's this, this giving of the manna is this ongoing miracle.
That's true.
But it seems that after a year, that miracle has lost its shine. I think probably for a while, they were pretty like, wow, this is amazing. He's giving us bread from heaven every day. And now they're like, he's giving us bread from heaven every day.
Well, apparently freed them too. I mean, they were in bondage, they were slaves, they weren't free. This God came, and this is their God, but they didn't know, I guess they didn't know he was coming, actually ever going to show up. Maybe they were at that point, I don't know, but okay, you've been delivered, and now you're free, and the God, who's your God, the one and only God's taking care of you. I mean, you could say thank you.
You could say.
I get that. It's been a year, and they're tired, man. I mean, I had to struggle. I still struggle with. All of us do. It's really hard to be thankful when we don't have everything.
Right.
I mean, we had it better back there, and now we're here. Now you brought me here, God. But I kind of miss some of these other things that I don't have right now. What's up with that? And how come now I don't have this available to me, or that opportunity, or whatever? And we all face that, but we also were all delivered. I mean, in some ways different. We all had different experiences, but it's like every day I want to be willing to thank God that I've been delivered every single day. So that I should be thankful for whatever my deliverer wants to give me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like I said, like this particular passage obviously is operating in extremes and giving some extreme examples, but I think that it's really telling of the human condition that I think that is true of all of us. Like you're saying, that it's like I think sometimes we're unaware of all the ways that God provides for us every day, and all the things that he's delivered. We lose sight of like you're saying, the things that he's delivered us from, or we get so fixated on something that we used to have that we forget all of the oppression that maybe went along with that one good thing. And so we get tunnel visioned on these different aspects of what we do or don't have.
That's very good.
And we tend to then complain. So we may not be saying, I had free food while I was in slavery, but we might be saying, I used to have all this extra money to go do all this extra stuff, and I don't have it now. But God might have delivered you out of a job that was terrible. You know, like, I don't know. I'm kind of
Well,
just
that's actually
Sure, they go from a job of, you know, bricklaying, now they're pitching tents, traveling, herding sheep. I mean, it's not exactly the ease up. I think even your Enneagram 7s would be getting sick of traveling after 2 years.
yeah.
And so, I mean, this thing, like, you know, there's this constant grind they're living under, and having the basic same, very plain food diet.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, human conditions struggle in there for sure.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, down it's like, God's like,
yeah.
are you actually asking or just wanting?
Right. Right. It's like, yeah, and because I think that like what you're pointing out too is like there's a lack of thankfulness. Like they're basically back to this point of wanting to go back to Egypt. It's like, and again, like we see the wrath and we see the burning anger here, but I think it honestly, I think that, you know, you often hear it said anger is a secondary emotion. Like what's behind his anger is probably this sadness of he's like, I have a plan, guys, just trust me, I know what I'm doing. Stick with me. We're gonna go there, and they're wanting to go back to captivity. And so I think that there's an element of sadness and grief behind his anger. And it's also this aspect of he's fathering them. He's like, no, I've given you, I've been very clear of the conditions of my presence with you. And when you deviate from that, there are consequences. And so he's being a good father, really, by following through on some of the consequences, as hard as it might be to see these examples of plagues and anger. And, you know, as we continue to move on, the next couple portions, there's some really heavy examples of some consequences for their continued grumbling against the Lord. So again, I think in some senses, I think the Torah uses some extremes to convey a point, and it's quite effective in that. So anyway, so that's kind of why I said like this chapter is a little bit of our shifting point of like we're gonna get into heavier and heavier examples of this tension between these people that God has called out and delivered, and how there's some of the consequences of their disobedience. Okay, so we just have a few minutes, but let's jump back and pick up this last section of Numbers 11 for just a minute. So going back to verse 24, so this is gathering 70 elders that are going to share this load with Moses. So okay, so let's just read a few verses here. So Moses went out and told the people Adonai's words. He gathered 70 of the elders of the people and had them stand around the tent. Adonai descended in the cloud and spoke with him. He took some of the ruach that was on him and placed it on each of the 70 elders. It so happened that when the ruach first rested on them, they prophesied, but never again. 2 men, however, had remained in the camp. The name of one was Eldad, and the name of the other was Medad. The ruach rested on them. And they were among those listed, but they had not gone out to the tent, so they prophesied in the camp. A young man ran and told Moses and said, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Joshua, son of Nun, the assistant of Moses since his youth, cried out and said, Moses, my Lord, stop them. But Moses said to him, are you jealous on my behalf? If only Adonai would make all the spirit, would put the spirit on all of them. And Moses and the elders of Israel returned to the camp. So, we have this really interesting situation where the ruach falls on them and they prophesy once and never again, which is interesting. I don't fully know what that means. But it seems that but most of them are outside the camp, so the rest of the people aren't hearing all this prophecy. They're just, I guess the assumption is that they're prophesying among themselves. But these two that didn't go, they still have the Ruach rest on them. They still prophesy, but they're within the camp. So it seems that it's recognizable that something seems to be out of order here, that they go run to tell Moses what's going on. We don't know what they're prophesying, we don't know what they're saying, but Moses' response is not one. I think the expectation would be that Moses would reprimand them for not having come out as was instructed. But again, and I don't know if, this seems to be in line with what the Lord would say, because this is, there doesn't seem to be consequence for it, but I think this is partially also part of Moses' breakdown of, great, I think everybody needs to prophesy, spread the load out here a little bit more. That's maybe not the right attitude either, but that's probably a little too far in that direction. But his point is that, it's a heavy burden to have the weight of the Spirit and this prophetic responsibility resting, and so I think there's probably also an aspect of this intimacy with the Lord that comes from being face to face and having His Spirit on you, but there's also there's a lot of responsibility, and it's a heavy burden. So yeah, and there's kind of Paul nods to this in 1 Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians 14, when he's talking about, I wish that all men would prophesy, in the context of talking about the gifts. We're not going to go and kind of tease all of that out right now, but my suggestion for you in light of this, about prophecy and the gifts, and because again, this is a great example of seeing how the Spirit works in this context, would be to go and read 1 Corinthians. My suggestion is that you read 12 through 14, you read the whole chunk, because I think it all goes together in how we look at the gifts of the Spirit and how they function, because I think they line up a lot with this, and also how they kind of are worked out in the community as a whole. So, I know that was kind of a quick
Flash parallel there. There was no procedural anomaly though when the Spirit rested on Saul and he prophesied at the school of the prophets.
Mm-hmm.
There was no procedural call out on that either.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's this recognition of so it's basically the yield to God gets to do what He wants. Because again, it's even, the Holy Spirit tends to show up in unexpected ways and doesn't seem to follow the order and structure that people think it should, because that's the story we see in Acts. And, we see that according to the Holy Spirit, and then they start to spread it, and then all of a sudden the Spirit's falling on the Gentiles before they've been immersed, and the people, and the disciples are like, hold on a second, this isn't the right order.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like,
or two elders in the camp.
Yeah.
You're like, wait, you weren't with the group.
Right. It's like, I like to say, my summary even of Acts, and I think it applies here too, is that, there's an established plan and order, and then the Holy Spirit shows up and kind of messes up the plan because the God gets to do what He wants with His Spirit.
Sorry,
You're right.
But God is, on the flip side, is so intent about order.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So because why did the two sons of Aaron die? You said, and after they die, they bring the incense in. He says, make sure you instruct the others not to come in at just any time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that would have been good to know. But
Right.
the thing is, order's really important to God, and you can't just do what you want.
Right.
You have to, at a point in time, you have to, and it was also strange. They knew they weren't doing what God
Right.
told them.
It wasn't.
He hasn't told them to do that. They just went in and did it. And
It wasn't inspired by.
Right, and God
the
didn't
Ruach.
and God has order about the camp, and you have to
Mhm.
stay in the camp, you can't be unclean, and all these things. So it does seem like they were doing what they thought was right when they ran and said, hey, they're prophesying outside, in the
Mhm.
camp, not in where they were told.
Yeah, and I think, but at the same time, it's also recognized that it really is truly the Spirit of God. And so, So I think that that's where we have to hold the tension between the order and the spirit. It's like, yes, there is order. You're right. God absolutely cares about order. You know, that's what all of this, you know, that we've been reading in the Torah and Leviticus and Numbers, that's what it's all about, is about order. But it seems that when the Spirit of God shows up, it's recognizable that it is truly the Spirit of God. And I think even going back to, like I said, we don't obviously have time to go through it, but when you look at how Paul talks about the gifts of the Spirit in 1 Corinthians, like I said, 12 through 14, you read the whole chunk. Okay. There's a lot of order to it.
Yeah.
And how the gifts are used in community. Like there's a lot of order, and there's a lot of, but it's full of the Spirit. And so,
it's like God saying, you can't do just what you want.
Right.
But I can.
Right. Right. And it's like the responsibility to follow the order of God and also yield to His Spirit.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's a good summary verse to close is, do not quench the spirit, do not despise prophecies, test all things, hold fast to what is good. So just test it to see if it's of the Lord.
Right. Exactly. I think that's good. All right, so let me pray and we will go to service. So Lord, we thank you again for your word, Lord. We thank you that you give us both order and spirit, Lord. Lord, I just ask that you continue to make it clear that your spirit, when your spirit is authentic, Lord, when it is your spirit doing something, and I also ask that you make it clear when we need to follow your prescribed order, Lord. I just ask that you would continue to teach us how to hold this tension, Lord. I ask that your presence would be with us. I thank you for your presence already, Lord. I just ask that your presence would remain with us through the rest of this Shabbat. We thank you so much for Shabbat, for this set apart time to just feel heaven pressing closer to earth, Lord. So we do just ask that we would feel that heaven pressing closer, and that we would just experience your presence in a profound way today, Lord. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen.